Hello, everyone, and welcome to Triangle of Fence. This is Monish. As always, I'm joined by Nishant. We started this podcast a few months ago, and the first episode we did was the bubble dribble. This kind of reminds me, and with the start of the season looming, this kind of reminds me of where we started. Like an upcoming season, people are not sure, players and teams are not sure of the rules, teams are not sure of how they're going to manage the entire COVID situation, no fans. So it kind of reminds me of where we started off. It kind of gives me a deja vu. We'll talk all about this new season, the new schedules, what teams are going to do, who are at an advantage, who are at a disadvantage, and all of that. We'll also take a look at some of the news items that are coming out. Kyrie Irving says he won't be giving any interviews. I guess that will not bring him to our podcast this season. Zan Williamson is on a no minutes restriction. A lot of fun stuff to talk about. We'll see how it goes. Hey Nishant, what's up? New season. The schedule is out for the first half of the season. 72 games. We knew about that. What do you think? I mean, it kind does a team have an advantage playing without crowds? With crowds, it kind of reminds me of our first episode where I asked you the same question. But what do you think now? Now that you've seen that how teams adjust to playing without crowds and not having players, people sitting on the sidelines, right?
Yeah, first of all, it sucks for the viewers. But
Of course.
from whatever we could glean from all of the player interviews, I think the big key takeaway was in the bubble, especially the players who were in the bubble, for them it sucked. I watched a
Mm-hmm.
couple of interviews. LeBron, I think, on Uninterrupted said the same, and so many players said the same. That for the players it sucked because when they have player introductions, when the match is about to begin, number 6 LeBron, oh, he was number 23, chalo. Now LeBron James, and then it's dead silence in the
Yeah.
bubble. It's dead silence. And the players are fooling around. They're acting like there's a crowd and blah blah blah. But it's eerie for them.
Right.
For the fans, and again, LeBron said this. He spoke to his wife, his mom, and I guess a bunch of players have the same kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
For the fans, the NBA did a great job of making it seem like a stadium atmosphere. Even with the piped in crowd noises, I think they had the
Right.
best sort of added in sound effects of any sport.
Mm-hmm.
Football tried, but there's always a lag in football. With NFL, it's the same thing. I think the NBA got it bang on. So um, that was a very high quality live stream, let's just call it, in this digital world, the NBA bubble. Now, which then means all of the teams that played in the bubble
Mm-hmm.
have a built-in advantage of sorts this season because they've already played
Right.
real basketball, competitive basketball without crowds. They have some
Right.
idea of what that works like. Which then means all of the other teams, and we saw an adjustment curve. It's not like every team came into the bubble and dominated straight away. The Lakers sucked until the playoffs came around, right? Part
True.
of that could have been them just taking it easy, but I'm sure there was a learning curve associated with it. And before they hit peak form, we saw some players just kind of come into their own in the bubble. People like TJ Warren,
Yeah.
and these guys just thrived in the bubble. Now, is that because there were no crowds and no pressure? Will these guys get adversely affected if there are crowds?
Mm-hmm.
We'll wait for that answer. But what's also true is right now with no crowd, I would expect TJ Warren to be Michael Jordan again, right? So all of the teams that didn't make the bubble, I think they're at a decided disadvantage. Some of them will thrive, some of them won't, and that's the interesting piece as to like how do Golden State play without a crowd? Without
Yep.
Because they have one of the best home crowds in the NBA. How do they
True.
fare without it? Uh, Toronto's playing in a different stadium, but will it really matter because there are no crowds? So would it really affect them, right? So these are interesting questions, but I think I don't think teams are going to take more than a few games to get
Mm-hmm.
into stride. Because I mean, these guys train all the time, and when you're in the NBA, you're surrounded by NBA players, and you're training with high caliber athletes. So worst case, this feels like training to them, but it's not like they go easy in training. So I'd expect most of these pros to make that adjustment very soon.
It's also going to be a baseball style travel, as they call it, right? You go to a city, you play the same team twice, and then you
Yeah.
come back. Does that give some advantage to certain teams, like some of those playoff teams that you mentioned, like the Miami Heat, right? Because you play a team, you figure out your advantages, how you work against a certain team. You have one more chance to go at it and win against them. So, do you think teams like Miami Heat will thrive in such a scenario?
Yeah, I'd expect them to. But I'm looking more at the Western Conference for this because when
Mm-hmm.
you're playing a team again and again and again,
Mm-hmm.
teams that are really built for the playoffs, those teams have an advantage because when you're playing back to back, maybe back to back to back, in rare cases,
Right.
you have time to figure out the opponent. But if you're a top tier team, you're going to win anyway. Whether you play back to back, back to back to back, whatever, you're going to win all three, if not one plus one plus one, right? So who does this really help? This helps teams that may not be able to beat some tough opponents the first time around, may need some adjustment time to kind of take them on. Now, that automatically means bottom tier team. So let's just say that excludes the top four in each conference. Then you're looking at for how many teams would this really be valuable? Because for most teams, you'd have that one or two teams that are tricky and that are kind of built to make it tough for you. Like, you know how you're looking at Dallas and you're saying maybe Houston, just for example, is a bad matchup for them,
right?
Just man to man. So then they need time to figure those out, but you'd expect them to win other matches, right? So now you're thinking, what are those teams for which multiple teams are bad matchups, which means they're not a very strong team to begin with, and to whom all of these wins matter. Most games you're going to play against any opponent will be opponents from the same conference.
Right.
So when you factor in all of these things, you're basically looking at the second half of the Western Conference, because that's the tougher conference. In the East, any one team is not going to play so many teams that are next to impossible to beat. That'll happen a lot in the Western Conference. So bottom half of the Western Conference, that's really it, really. Other than that, I really don't see any advantage or disadvantage. In fact, most teams would probably use this as load management and kind of pick up rotations. An interesting angle that this opens up is within each conference, teams that you're like, as the season goes on and you know more or less where you stand in the playoff run, teams that you're likely to go up against in the playoffs, getting an opportunity then to play them back to back, that's almost a playoff preview. And that's when things will start getting real exciting, because are you going to play mind games? Are you going to cool off now so as to not reveal too much? Are you going to go all out and win but risk exposing your winning strategy before the playoffs? That's when it really starts getting interesting. So I think largely this affects the Western Conference teams. I won't look at the East for much insights on this.
All right. Also, given that the NBA has stated rules now that if a player is tested positive, and if he's asymptomatic, which I think will most probably be the case in most of the players' situations, he will have to sit out for 10 days, then practice by himself for 2 days, and then come back. That gives him so every time every time a player is tested positive, he misses almost 2 weeks of games. That's a given now. And if someone say a Steph Curry sits out for 2 weeks, it's game over for the Warriors, because he's the only player that they're dependent on. So teams with single player heading the team, right, that is at a big risk, you think, than say a well-rounded team like say the Atlanta Hawks. Now they have much deeper squad, deeper roster. The Lakers have a deep roster. Teams like this, I think, will still survive. You have LeBron sit out for a few weeks, it's fine. You have AD sit out for a few weeks, it's fine. But teams that have a single star, like say a James Harden, if he's going to stay at Houston Rockets, or Steph Curry, they're going to struggle a lot more.
I don't know if I look at it the same way. First of all, you mentioned LeBron and AD. What about if Dudley sits out, right? Because the Lakers would be crushed.
Oh, yeah.
That's the
By the way, he's even prone to the virus.
I don't think so. I think the virus is going to stay away from him as much as starting minutes on the Lakers team. Look, no, I don't think this is that big a deal. I think the nightmare scenario for the league is when multiple players start getting infected, or maybe even across teams you have infections, because then you have a mini pandemic within the league, so to speak, and that's really the horror situation. So that's the biggest kind of worst case scenario. The other thing is players getting infected, especially superstars getting. I don't think we're really bothered about the backups and the squad rotation pieces, but the superstars, most players are likely to get infected once over the course of the regular season, right? One player getting infected twice, highly unlikely, because there are antibodies and those are good for a while, and it's unlikely that over the course of the regular season you have one player getting, right? So then when you take that into account, any superstar would miss 2 weeks at max? Because we've seen pro athletes, anyone who's got infected, 2 weeks is as much time as they've taken, and they've all come back easy.
Right.
Like Westbrook got infected at the start of the bubble and he was fine and up and running and playing. You look at the NFL, Cam Newton got COVID and he was back in 2 weeks, right? So, so worst case scenario, a superstar misses 2 weeks from COVID. Kawhi Leonard misses 4 times that amount just from load management, right? and 2 weeks, how many matches do you miss really? 4, 5 games max?
Yep.
People rest those many games. How many players are there in the league that really play 76, 77 games in a season?
True.
Like Portland, for example, they're as dependent as
Hmm.
Lillard as any team is on any player. He was out for a bunch of games last season, and they still kind of sneak through to the playoffs. If he's
Right.
fit a little more, that's a playoff team, right?
Hmm.
Same with Luka, same with LeBron, AD. All of these guys have 4 or 5 games is nothing over the course of a regular season. So I don't think
Hmm.
any one player getting injured really changes the fate of the league or the standings that much. Worst case was you just factor that in as load management or rest, and then play back to back when you come back, right? I think
Right.
the horror situation is multiple players on one roster, especially the key
Hmm.
players. Even
Hmm.
worse, multiple players on 2 rosters,
Right.
because then all of them have to sit out for the next game, and you're worried about how many have they infected on their same teams.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big challenge for the teams. The one other big change I would say for the season is the play-in scenario for 7, 8, 9, 10 teams, right? Now, this how it works is the seventh team plays the eighth team, and the winner goes through. The eighth team, the loser plays the winner of the ninth and 10th team. It's kind of an IPL playoff scenario. Now, does this change things for teams who are always targeting the eighth, seventh position? Now they can target, say, the ninth and 10th. That gives them an extra chance, right? Like, say, someone like Portland who benefited from this the last time. Uh, do they have like what I'm trying to say here is the
Yeah,
sixth place now becomes as important as how
right.
the eighth place was previously.
Yeah, but there's ripple effects across the league from this, because now there's more incentive to finish slightly above
Mm-hmm.
than earlier, when you thought just kind of sneak into the 8th spot and you're good. You've got to
Right.
be a little above that to really lock it in. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I'm more interested in, and it's something that we've spoken about a bunch of times before, is there is lesser incentive for you to tank now, unless
Yeah.
you're absolutely like you're the Knicks or the Warriors from last year, and you know you can do everything within your power to finish rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
All right, maybe, but there's lesser and lesser incentive to be, say, 10th,
Right.
and trying to go for that lottery spot when you can play a little better, get to the playoffs, right? If you have the squad for it, if you absolutely like, if you're OKC, you have
Mm-hmm.
one player and 11 draft picks as your squad. Then what
Mm-hmm.
do? You tank. But
Yeah.
but otherwise, there's a little more incentive to really go for it. Earlier, it was that if you couldn't really make the 8th spot or couldn't compete, you're like, screw it, I don't want 9, 10, I don't want 11, I want to go rock bottom, I want to go 15th in the conference. So there's more teams that have incentive to compete, especially the middle of the pack,
Right.
that don't quite suck or that don't quite actively want to tank,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of halfway through the season lose momentum because they don't feel like number 8 is within their grasp, and so they kind of they play with less motivation and less effectiveness. That's the real exciting part. Um, the other angle of an 8th place team trying to finish 6th, that's fine. But there are more teams now competing to get into the playoffs throughout the length of the season. And
Yep.
then there's that little mini playoff situation. So that's what makes it more competitive. I love this move. I think they should keep this regardless of bubble and COVID or whatnot.
I agree, and I think it gives the likes of, say, Atlanta Hawks, Charlotte Hornets, and those level of teams a chance to compete and probably even go to the playoffs.
True, I
All
agree.
right, and moving on to the other news item, Zion Williamson says that he will go into the season with no minutes restriction. Finally, we'll get to see a lot more of Zion Williamson. Excited?
I mean, I've been dying to see Zion play a regular stretch of games. And I'll say what I've said before about Zion. That
Mm-hmm.
frame, with that speed, that level of athleticism, and his gameplay, his style of play, all of them together, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like his style of play, but in, say, a Giannis frame, okay, works. That athleticism, that body, maybe in a LeBron James height and weight,
Mm-hmm.
works. Even that's a rare thing, but works. But at 6, what is he? 6'6", 6'7",
Yeah,
uh,
6, 7, I
way heavier
guess.
than LeBron. And he's got to come down in weight, right? That goes without saying. But and then he plays and jumps and runs around like he's Derrick Rose.
Right.
And Derrick Rose's 6'1" body couldn't handle that level of explosiveness. Imagine this guy with all of his weight. So he's going to be a perennial injury threat. And what's even more frightening is he's already had a bunch of injuries. Not
Mm-hmm.
just in the NBA, even in his college career, he had injuries. In high school, I think he had some big injury that kept him out for a while. And first season, he was like, first half of the season, most of the games he was out injured. Then he came back, played a little bit. And then there was a 5-month hiatus. 5 months is a long time to recover. unless it's like a career-ending injury. 5 months is a long time.
Yeah,
He came back, he was still on a minutes restriction.
true.
All right, maybe they weren't trying to make the playoffs, but it still felt incredibly precautious. Now, either this is a franchise being overly protective of the face of their franchise and the guy
Mm-hmm.
they see as their future, or there's something about Zion that they're not talking about. Maybe there is something serious there, right? So I'm not buying this no minutes restriction thing. I think the first sign of injury, he'll be back on a minutes restriction. New
Mm-hmm.
Orleans gives you every kind of feeling of they're going to just keep doing this season after season until they're absolutely sure they can play him, because they don't want to, they can't imagine a future where they got the number one pick, they got Zion Williamson, and then he was out for like a long period of time.
All right. Talking about socially distancing, I want to go on to my next topic. James Harden is socially distancing from the Houston Rockets. He's not turned up at practice, and with someone who's turned down $100 million deal, it's
Yep.
highly unlikely that he's going to stay at Houston this year, right? And
Yep.
very likely that he's going to be traded. Probably most likely to Brooklyn because that's where he wants to go. But that remains to be seen. But definitely not staying at Houston this year.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like it. If he's going to stay, why turn down that deal?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there is the third possibility of you sign that deal and then ask for a trade, but that's too much money. His salary right now, that itself is incredibly difficult to fit into. And
Right.
any team trading for him, they've got to match salaries. That itself is tough. And then they've got to still be accountable for their cap. Even with luxury tax, this is a huge salary to fit in. And most teams that can fit in, why would you want to go there? Because that's another Houston situation, right? So if he
Right.
wants to go stack the deck, those teams would already have, like Brooklyn, they're already struggling on the cap, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't really see any other rationale. Nobody sulks when you have a 2 year, $103 million deal. It's not, you don't sulk and say no to that. That doesn't happen. You say no to that if you made it absolutely clear you don't want to stay. No amount of money can convince you and you want to be traded. Why didn't you ask
Yeah.
for a sign and trade? Because, well, cap and salary matching and all of that. So intent wise, I'd be at this point, if Harden goes back
Mm-hmm.
and signs another deal, I'd be shocked. If the Houston Rockets, after he said no to that extension,
Mm-hmm.
force him to stay without trading him, again, I'd be
Mm-hmm.
shocked. They can do that technically.
Yep.
But why would you want to do that with such a demotivated star where if you've really made a basketball assessment, even with James Harden, John Wall, assuming they're fit, what is it that you expect this squad to achieve? Western Conference semis again, maybe the finals. I don't see them coming out from the West. So what's the point, right? If you have a star that wants out, you have a star that will eventually be a free agent. Trade him now, where he's
Mm-hmm.
super valuable, where you're set for the next 5 years. Because you trade him, you're either getting young players or veterans or whatever, a package that's setting you up very well for this season, or you're getting a bunch of picks that will set you up for the future. Do
Right.
that now.
Right, absolutely. Because when say LeBron James and AD are securing their futures by signing multi-year deals, it's very strange that James Harden hasn't, and that's clearly because he wants to move out of Houston.
Right.
That's something that we'll keep our close eyes on, and we'll see where that takes
Yeah.
us.
Also, if you're James Harden and time is ticking, you've not
Mm-hmm.
won a chip yet. The clock's ticking on your career.
Right.
You'd want it now. And Houston, whatever they do, whatever trades moves they make, it's not happening this year. The earliest is next year. Yeah, that's if they make a few great trades and pick up pieces in free agency. So doesn't make sense. Also, doesn't make sense to sign that 100 million plus deal unless it's just money.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, I mean, absolutely take the money and play your years out in Houston. But if the
Right.
chip is the ambition at this stage and he feels like he's made enough money,
Mm-hmm.
then signing that deal and staying would be even worse, because that gives the team even less flexibility to bring in pieces around him. So if he wants the chip, the trade's the only way, and if he wants it now, almost a risk-free situation of getting the chip, Brooklyn seems like the best place to go. Now we've heard a ton of rumors that Golden State have inquired about Harden.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how true that is, but I think that'll be an interesting Steph and James Harden. I think that'll be an interesting combo.
Yeah, I can't imagine who will be having most of the ball because James Harden needs like what 24 seconds to take a shot. Steph Curry needs the
Yeah,
ball
the
all the
strange
time.
part. Yeah. I mean, Steph Curry is a willing passer. He'll give it up, and he doesn't need as much time to get a shot off, right? So he'll give it up. but it'll be a huge adjustment for him to switch from Clay Thompson, who
Mm-hmm.
it's just the ball touches his hands and he releases a three, right? He doesn't
Yep.
take a second to dribble. He barely dribbles.
Yep.
So from going away from the greatest catch and shoot player the game has ever seen to
Mm-hmm.
James Harden, who you give him 10 seconds on the ball and he'll dribble for 14 sometimes. That'll be an interesting adjustment. But two players of that caliber on one team, wow.
Yeah, and yeah, that would make Warriors big time contenders again. But
Yeah,
kind of things don't look bright for Houston right now, given the entire situation. They got in John Wall, they got in Cousins, they have Eric Gordon. A lot of time on the hospital, COVID
right,
looming as well.
right.
So I really hope for the best for Houston. Things don't look too bright out there. Talking about drama and all that James Harden is doing, what about Kyrie Irving? He says that he will not have any media interaction this season. That rules out him coming on a podcast ever, at least for
Damn
the
it.
season.
Oh.
But interesting change of things and not surprising at all, right? Coming from someone like Kyrie Irving.
No, and we've said this before. James Harden and I'm sorry, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on the court are an explosive combination. Box office, can't wait to see them play. Off the court, that's another Real Housewives show on Netflix waiting to happen. Right, just the drama is unreal. Wherever Kyrie goes,
Mm-hmm.
it's another level of drama altogether. KD is also a bit neurotic, with his burner account admissions and wanting to get credit for the work that he's done.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he puts in the effort, goes home, and he's okay with whatever happens and the fallout. He is incredibly keen on ensuring that the right perception of him exists in the
Right.
world, and you can see that from his social media behavior, his interviews, all of that. So this, like we said, Steve Nash has his work cut out, man. The personnel management here is going to be quite a nightmare, and Kyrie didn't even wait for the league to get started before he went off with one of his tantrums. I mean, he did this at Boston, where he caused a bunch of locker room rifts. Comes to Brooklyn, and the few games he plays, he goes fucks things up in front of the media. Because in the middle of last season, he was already talking about how in the postseason they're going to get better pieces and improve. I mean, the season's still on. What are you doing, man? Calling out your players like that in the media. So I don't know if he doesn't get it or if that's just his personality. Isn't he a flat earther? At some point, he mentioned that he
Yeah.
anti-vax. Yeah. So, yeah. So
I
maybe it's
mean,
not a
yeah.
bad thing. You know what? Maybe it's not a bad thing that he's not talking to the media, because every time he has spoken, season after season,
Uh-huh.
he's made blunder after blunder, and he's given just the podcasting world so much content, including when he said, wasn't he the guy who said he doesn't need a coach, stuff like that. So,
He also said that now that he has Kevin Durant, he can trust someone to take a shot in the
yeah.
final seconds.
Oh,
He
yeah.
played with LeBron James.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe it's not a bad thing. Now that I think about it, I thought this was drama that he threw a tantrum, and maybe he doesn't look at it like a tantrum, but that he said no more media speeches, no more media availability this season. Now that I think about it, maybe not the worst thing that could have happened to the Brooklyn Nets.
That'll be interesting to see how long that lasts also, because
Yeah.
I think he's going to hit a game winner and he'll be there talking to the media.
And let's see.
Sticking to the topic of drama, what about Paul George? The latest thing that I've seen of Paul George was after he went on that
All the
podcast
smoke.
and spoke all about how Doc Rivers didn't utilize him well. He was utilizing him like a Ray Allen or a
Yeah, of
JJ
course.
Redick, but he hit the backboard trying to do that. And
Sideboard. Like
sideboard, yeah.
backward would have been quite the achievement from that angle, honestly. Like a boomerang.
And what about the statement where he says that now he wants to retire at Clippers? Also, given the fact that he said the same while he was at the Pacers, he said the same while he was at OKC, and now the same thing while at Clippers. How long is he going to last at the Clippers? I think we got to take bets on this.
Yeah. Look, I feel a little bad for Paul George, because at this point we've trolled him, the whole world has trolled him so much. For something where honestly the team was equally guilty. Kawhi was equally guilty. Yes, Paul George didn't turn up in the postseason. Kawhi actually had pretty phenomenal performances till that point. But if the team goes down, the team goes down. I mean, they blew a 3-1 lead. What excuse do you have, really? But yeah, man, Paul George is another one of those who every time he comes in front of the mic, you never know what you're going to get. And I think as a viewer, as a podcaster that has no personal relationship, I'd say I'm honestly sick of the excuses. Like, you win, you lose, it's fine. You had a bad game, everyone does. But
Yep.
Just cut out the excuses. Like the coach is a problem, the fans are a problem, the teammates are a problem, Montrezl Harrell's chemistry is a problem. Everything's a problem except how you fail to turn up in the
True.
postseason time and time again. It's not the first time. Pull up all of his stats from clutch games, games that matter, deciding games, or games where the series was tied, and his shooting's atrocious. It's always under 50% in these clutch games.
Yep.
So it's about time he stops the blame game. Maybe he's just not that guy, or maybe he is, and he needs to show the world that, because he is an elite player. He's an elite defender. He's an elite attacker. He can score multiple ways, outside, inside. I mean, the man knows his game. It's just that kind of pales in big game situations, as many have in the past with equal levels of talent, and then comes out and makes all of these excuses that just make him look bad. Like the coach didn't make adjustment. What adjustment is the coach supposed to make for you choking or hitting the sideboard? You had a 3-1 lead, double-digit leads in every single of the last 3 games that you dropped.
Yep.
What are judgments? Because apparently the strategy was good enough to get you till that point, to get you to finish second in the league that they finished, to get you past a very strong Mavs team, albeit with help from injuries and the refs, and a 3-1 lead against the Denver Nuggets. Good enough to get you double-digit leads going into the third and fourth quarters in the last 3 games that you dropped. So what adjustments exactly? I mean, what is it about Doc Rivers' strategy that was so bad if you all got to that point and then blew it every single time? There's no adjustment for choking. And he should stop this blame game nonsense and just go out there and perform. I want to see Paul George, the performer, back. He is that guy. And he has plenty of time before the postseason, before maybe nerves kick in. I don't know what it is. But he'll just go out there, start performing, and everyone's going to shut up.
True, of course. Yeah, I think he's been a brilliant player all these years, and no doubting his talent. It's just that he needs to turn it up and show what he's capable of.
Also, Matt Barnes, I believe it was, who of course is the co-host of the All the Smoke podcast, where Paul George said all this stuff. Matt Barnes, I don't remember what show it was, but he went on ESPN and he said he gets the feeling that Paul George is in his head a lot. He seems to be overthinking too much, seems to be second guessing himself. He should just go out there, be Paul George. And it is what it is. And I agree. I think he should just go out there, start performing. Listen, if Paul George opens the season with a triple-double, how many of them are going to be trolling him for what happened last season? If he just puts on a show, any which way, doesn't really even have to be a triple-double. If he goes out, puts on a show, game in, game out, who really is going to talk about last season?
Yeah, I think as the saying goes, you're only as popular as your last performance. Correct. So that holds that's very true in the sporting world at least. But I think we're running out of time. Always nice doing this with you and looking through all the rumors and tidbits as we approach the start of the season. Also, the Bucks have gifted Giannis a pen for his 26th birthday. That makes things interesting. It'll be fun if he uses that pen to sign for some other team.
I think that was the symbolic nature of the gift, that a pen to sign your new contract. Also, hey, I'm not judging them. I mean, they need to save all the money they can if they're going to give him that supermax.
Absolutely. All right, then we'll do this again soon, and I'll catch up with you tomorrow then.
Sounds good, man. Cheers.
Bye.